Hi, this is Elliot Axelman from the Liberty Block. Check us out on libertyblock.com and live every week at 7 p.m. on Thursday evenings.
Always principled, always libertarian.
Welcome to the Liberty Block Live. I'm Elliot Axelman. We're here with Ryan Weiss.
Ryan Weiss here. How are you?
So on this week's episode of the Liberty Block Live, on the first half, we're going to be speaking to Ryan Weiss, who, though he's usually a co-host for the Liberty Block Live, he will be playing the role of interviewee as we interview him about his recent transition from male to female. On the second half of the Liberty Block Live, we have Aaron Day, Libertarian candidate for governor, in studio, and we have a whole lot of questions for him about his race in the primary election for governor, since there's a primary this year in the Libertarian Party. Before we get started with our interview with Ryan Weiss, we just want to mention that we understand the topic of gender identity is a very sensitive and complicated and very fluid subject and very sensitive and personal to a lot of people. We don't want to offend anyone. We understand that we don't understand everything about gender identity, and we're constantly learning more, and I'm personally very open to learning more. And in talking to Ryan, we're going to learn a whole lot more about his experience, but we want to focus this episode primarily on the effect that the gender identity movement, which is increasing very rapidly across the country, the impact it'll have on the private and public sector. For example, on private companies and the culture and institutions, but also the government and legal institutions and the courts and public school systems. So, Ryan Weiss, welcome to the Liberty Block.
Thank you very much.
Thank you for being interviewee, though you're usually my co-host. He will be. So, we actually have his license. You got your permanent license now, right? Switch to female?
That's right, actually. I think we can show it on camera. Just make sure...
see if we can have Mr. Engineer show
my date of birth isn't showing there. So as you can see, I am now legally female. That's right.
So as far as
Mrs.
New Hampshire
Weiss.
government,
Yep.
Miss Weiss, as far as the New Hampshire government is concerned, Ryan is now a female, which we're going to get into, which means some very interesting developments as far as the government is concerned. And we're going to get into why the government is involved in this.
And why did I do this? Yeah. We'll get into that as well.
Absolutely. So first, just the process. Tell me how difficult the process was, how lengthy it was.
Yeah, so getting my gender changed... Never thought I'd say that sentence. Getting my gender changed was... it was a bit of a process. So... I had to go get my license renewed, and I'm not sure. Have you ever heard of Lauren Southern?
I heard of her. I don't know much about her, though.
Yeah, so Lauren Southern actually also changed her gender from female to male.
Wow.
I can't remember the exact reason why she did it, but I had to get my license renewed because I just turned 21. And so, I figured, why don't I see if I can get my gender changed as well? And, I had a couple of thoughts about it. My first and primary motivation for getting my gender changed was... the draft exists. Right now, because I'm male and between the ages of 18 and 26, if the United States was to go to war and they needed soldiers, my name is in a lottery, and I could be picked at any time and become conscripted into the military and have to go and fight and potentially kill people or be killed myself. That's a terrifying thought to me. That is really... that's really quite a scary
Even though
thing.
you'd be fighting for freedom, for our freedom.
Yeah. Freedom's so good, it has to be enforced. So that was, one thought that was on my mind was, if I wasn't necessarily male, would I still be required to be drafted? And another motivating factor was my car insurance as well. So I called around and I found out that women actually get lower car insurance rates than men do. Now, what's the criteria of being a man or a woman? Well, I would suppose it's just whatever's on your license, right?
Yeah.
So that's why I did it. Those are kind of some of the major motivations, along with some other things.
But you do identify as a female or gender fluid, right?
Yeah, I'd say I'm gender fluid. Like I say, I'm probably male in most of my day-to-day life, but when it comes to fighting in wars
and especially
driving,
talking about war might make people really think about
very feminine.
how masculine they want to be in regards to fighting in 180 or 190 countries we have U.S. military currently.
Exactly.
And actively fighting battles, and I think 100, I believe.
How many hundreds of military bases in foreign countries? I mean, it's incredible. So as far as the how, I had to go get my license renewed. Initially, I just tried to check female on the box for my new license, and they were like, no, you can't do this. And so I was like,
Who said you can't do this?
The woman at the DMV, she said, if you want to, because my license originally on my license was male, or my gender
Okay.
on my original license was male. So I actually had to get a doctor's note. So I got the letter from the DMV. It had to be signed by like a licensed medical associate.
And when you went to your doctor for an appointment specifically for this, you didn't question, your doctor didn't question about how, about why you identify as a female or anything? Or?
Well, so I went to just a Manchester Health Clinic. I didn't go to my
So it
typical
wasn't your
doctor.
primary care doctor?
Right, it wasn't my primary care doctor. And just because...
Yeah, and it probably would have taken months anyway to get an appointment.
Yeah, exactly. Probably would have taken months to get an appointment. And, I mean, my doctor... has known me for so if I had tried to say now I'm
but
fluid,
again
I don't know.
and what we're going to get
May have been
into
more
is
difficult.
he might not have questioned you. Again, you can be you can have a history of being the most 100% masculine man who never had gender confusion or identity any difference in identity, and one day you can go to your doctor, and again, either with legal pressure or just cultural pressure in general. I don't think most doctors, my doctor, I don't think he would even dare. I don't think that he would have the backbone, the will to question my identity. If I went to my doctor right now and said I'm a female, do you feel like they kind of have to give you what you want and I guess take it at face value?
No, I mean I feel like the practitioner I went to really pressed me, really wanted to learn more about it. But it was very respectful in the way that she did it.
And did you mention the wars? And when you think about war, that's when you feel more feminine?
No, I didn't mention that. I just said, sometimes I feel feminine.
Yeah.
And I feel like a woman. And
Yeah.
I'd like to be known as a woman. And I was actually really surprised by how easy it was. Not surprised in a negative way, but I just had never understood what that was. Immediately I was offered androgenizing drugs.
Wow.
Yeah, so she said, yeah, we'll get you set up with a prescription for estrogen. And she said, here's
Wow.
the timeline. So she said, like 1 to 2 years, your hips will get rounder. 2 to 3 years.
Wow.
You might you'll have breast tissue growing. And I was like, whoa.
Wow.
Okay. Whew.
You don't feel that feminine.
Yeah. And then, she gave me a list of plastic surgeons and hair removal.
Wow.
So yeah, so I really for anyone who is maybe seriously transgendered. Not to say that I'm gender fluid when it comes to war and car insurance, but someone who's seriously transgendered, it's kind of nice how seriously they can.
Yeah.
they
Well,
can
New
get.
Hampshire, we are one of the most tolerant states, I think.
Oh,
very,
yeah.
very tolerant. in New
Absolutely,
Hampshire.
yeah.
And we spoke about that with the New York Times articles saying we're not tolerant.
Yeah, that
Yeah.
we did. Yeah.
So I want to get into how this really affects the government aspects of things, and then the courts and the law, and how the state kind of gets involved in every aspect of our lives, from your marriage to your children to all the documentation for your kids being born and going to school and every step of life, and whether you're married and involved in your gender and your license. Everything kind of it has to be official. If the government doesn't say it, it's not official. If you get married and you love someone and you form a union with them, religiously or otherwise, it's not really official. And society, I don't think, really recognizes it outside of the super religious small groups that are super religious. Society doesn't recognize you as being married unless the government gives you that paper. And it's the same way with licenses and so many other certifications that the government has to certify, which is very interesting. But before we get to the government, I want to talk about some private sector issues, which is more complicated because we generally go on what's the law. We don't talk about a whole lot about the private businesses because we believe in absolute property rights, which I think you do too.
Absolutely.
Now, a few things that I know, again, from my background in healthcare, in hospitals, but also EMS on the ambulances. Hospitals very often, for certain populations especially, hospitals try to have a same gender provider, be it doctor, nurse, tech. They have the same gender provider provide care, especially for certain populations. Sometimes minors, but sexual assault, when a woman comes in for a rape kit or something for an ER, which I've transported a few of these from one facility to another, they, for obvious reasons, want to have a female doctor examine them, of course. But also many OB issues, OBGYN issues, it's a lot of females. When I did rotations, the OB rotation was almost all females. All the
Right.
residents doing the surgery, the OBs and the surgeons, a lot of females. And it makes more sense. In general, if I were a woman, I'd be a lot more comfortable with a female doctor and nurse examining me, of course. Also, the psych patients, anyone with acute mental illness or a chronic mental illness, very often in the ER, in the hospital, they have a female provider for females and a male provider for males. It makes more sense. And especially for transports. So as we were discussing earlier, it's when you're in the ambulance, it really is vulnerable. And unfortunately, some providers would take advantage of those who have mental illness and who either can't speak because they have advanced MR, or they won't be believed. There was actually an incident. I think there was a hospital somewhere in New York where a lot of the psych patients were ended up pregnant, and they eventually got to the bottom of it. And I think it was that while being transported in the ambulances, just horrible.
Yeah.
And that's when they're vulnerable because there are no cameras. Whereas the facility, the nursing, the psych facility and the hospital might have cameras. So for obvious reasons, I know of at least one big hospital system, EMS system, that always has a female in back of the ambulance in the patient compartment with a female psych patient. That way they can't accuse you of any issues because it makes it more difficult at least to be accused of sexual assault. Not that it can't happen, but it just gives them at least some cushion, some cover for legal trouble. They have males with males and females with males, and they always have a female EMT with all the female psych patients, even if they're 90 years old or 5 years old, 10 years old, 20 years old. And if they only have 2 males on the EMT crew, they'll provide a female nurse or tech. They'll always have a female in back with that female patient. Now, I've been wondering for the last few years how this gender identity movement of New York City, and this is in New York, I believe New York City recognizes legally 31 genders. There are 31 different genders, from male, female, male to female, transgender, gender fluid, non-binary, all the other gender identities that people might identify as. And according to the law, you actually, the reason I think the law came to be in New York City is because employers have to refer to their employees by their preferred pronoun. And if an employee tells an employer they want to be called by he or she or they or whatever other gender.
My pronouns are Your Majesty.
Yeah, I've heard of that one. So if you actually tell your employer in New York City, I believe, that you want to be called by a certain pronoun, and they call you by a different one, so they refuse to call you she, even though you're now a female, they still call you he, and you prove malicious intent that they did it, on purpose and they knew better. I think the penalty or the lawsuit, but I think it's a penalty that it could be $250,000 fine in New York City, I believe. So you can correct me if I'm wrong, but it might have been a case where they were awarded $250,000, but I think it's a fine of $250,000 in New York City. So they recognize 31 genders. Now this system works in New York City and the surrounding counties too. But what are they going to do going forward in a decade when more municipalities, cities, and states, and maybe the federal government, when they recognize there are 31 genders? In Massachusetts, there was actually a bill, and they were either considering a vote on 73 different genders, or they had a vote on 73 genders in regards to a license plate for male and female. They wanted, at least some people in the Massachusetts State House a few weeks ago, I believe, wanted 73 genders. So again, it's varying, and there's a movement of people who are now coming out who are identifying as more than just the two genders. So I'm just curious, I don't know if you have any thoughts, but I'm curious what private institutions like EMS and hospitals and other institutions will do when they can't document male-female. On every documentation form for every patient for EMS, and I think doctors as well, they have to check male or female. Will that be expanded to 30 or more?
It's tough to say, and with some people like to make the distinction between gender and biological sex. Some people don't make that distinction. I mean, the fact is, people are individuals. Everyone has different levels of hormones, whether that's testosterone and estrogen. Everyone has different life experiences. Everyone has different preferences as well. So it's tough when you have a centrally organized system such as the licensing. Like with New Hampshire licenses, for example, you can only select male or female. So for someone who doesn't identify with either of those genders,
what do they do?
What do they do? Yeah, I'm not sure. But it is also difficult because I feel like sometimes there are benefits or preferences that people have to deal with someone of a specific gender. One example would be, being a woman and preferring to see a woman doctor. I think that's a very reasonable request. And I think
I prefer seeing male doctors.
I also prefer to see male doctors, for sure. And I don't think that's an intolerant preference. I don't think that can be labeled as such.
Personally, I don't think any preference, and I think I just published an article on libertyblock.com, and I could link it in the show notes as well, about discrimination. And I pretty much say discrimination is inherent to choice. When I choose to be with a certain woman of a certain ethnicity, I am by default
excluding
discriminating.
every other
Yeah,
one.
discriminating and
Yeah.
offending every other race.
Right.
I've never dated a Chinese woman. Am I discriminating against them? Does it matter if I've what if I've dated women from every other nation but not China? What if only half the nations? When is it discrimination?
Yeah.
And every choice. I had McDonald's a few times in the last week. No Burger King. Am I discriminating against them? I'm discriminating, but they don't have a certain color or gender identity, so it's not an issue. But I discriminate against. I've never dated a trans person, not that I know of. So we discriminate in every choice. Every choice. I drink Coke more than Pepsi. I just always liked Coke more. Am I discriminating against Pepsi? I am, and that's okay. And personal preference. Again, the laws are different, and we'll get into laws and about all the protected classes of laws and their ever increasing amount of protected classes.
Yeah, I have something for that, Elliot.
Yeah.
So I looked up the $250,000 fine thing,
Yeah.
and it looks like that. And I'm trying to be as unbiased about this as I can. So I'm using pretty leftist sites
Yeah.
like Washington
Oh, yeah.
Post and Snopes.
Ew.
And even according to them, the new guidelines, discrimination against a transgender individual could result in fines up to $250,000. From the articles I've read, it doesn't seem all that clear as to what would constitute
I
discrimination,
think
and
it's
it doesn't
just
seem to be.
knowingly
never
calling,
does.
knowingly misgendering an employee. I think it's for employers.
So if I don't want to date a transgender woman, am I discriminating?
Yeah, and that's the
Is
thing,
that a-
and
is
that's
that a hate
why.
crime, you know?
And I think us libertarians, we are called pro-discrimination, and I am. I'm
Yes.
100% pro-discrimination on a
pro-discrimination.
personal level. I have a preference. I have an affinity for everything in my life. I like certain things. I like
The
Thor.
shirt you're wearing.
I like plaid shirts. I've been wearing plaid shirts primarily for like 20 years now, since I was in
a
middle
solid
school.
color, yeah.
Yeah, we all have preferences, and I again, as an individual, as a property rights absolutist, as a libertarian, as a free market believer, I am the biggest advocate of discrimination because it's choice. And discrimination, again, we talk about words that sound good and sound bad. Equality sounds good. Discrimination sounds bad.
Yeah, that's
not the case.
That's the Orwellian training that we've gone through public schooling and other and national media and things like that. The fact is that if someone wants to discriminate in a way that I think is offensive, for example, I have a lot of black friends. I like black people. There's no bias there.
Yeah.
If someone wants to express that bias, to me that would be very offensive.
And that's
I don't
exactly
think
what I wrote about. Yeah.
I don't think you can judge someone based on the color of their skin, but I think that person shouldn't be forced
to have friends of any ethnicity.
or to do business with anyone of any ethnicity.
Yep.
Now, I would never do business with someone who decides to discriminate against someone because of the color of their skin. I think that's offensive. I think that's wrong. I think that's a very old philosophy that doesn't work anymore. But should
people should
have
be
the
free to do
freedom
it.
to do so. I don't think they should be forced to sell their property to anyone. You should be able to discriminate and not give anyone your property for any reason. And that's not a radical philosophy. That's property rights 101.
Yeah, that's exactly what I just wrote about the HUD. The HUD and the DOJ are actually suing Facebook, I believe. I think they're taking them to court because they allowed for some property owners and property management companies to advertise to, when they advertise on Facebook and they target certain ethnicities, apparently they excluded some because they didn't want disabled people to be renting their apartments and stuff because they're just more difficult tenants naturally, but also some races. They didn't want, I think, maybe black, some Latino countries they excluded in targeting, which again, is it bigoted? Yeah, it is. It is racist if you're in a not target, you don't want to rent out to black people, but we can't have even worse than that is having a law where the federal government controls commerce and controls housing. The more the government controls housing, the worse society gets. Coming from New York, I know that.
If you don't like racism, don't do business
Yeah.
with racists.
So I want to get
Economic
back.
ostracism is a fantastic way of
Absolutely.
enforcing
I want to
social
talk more about licenses
Yeah.
and abolishing the gender, but I want to talk about insurance as well and just mention one quick thing about insurance. And I learned this years ago when I saw that a female counterpart who was right around my age, within a year of my age, had insurance in New York. I think it was like a fifth of what I was paying a month. It was ridiculous. I didn't believe it. I had to double check the numbers that it was 2 digits and I was paying 3 digits, of course, per month.
Yeah.
And apparently what insurance companies say, and again, they're private, so I'm not going to get into the legal standpoint, but just culturally, back to the private sector for a minute. the insurance companies, they say that males get in more accidents. What are they going to say in years to come when there are 73 genders and male? It doesn't necessarily mean that binary distinction that it used to be, male and female, because currently they say males get in more accidents because of just more risk-taking behavior. Is it true? It probably is.
No, it is true.
It is. It's a fact.
True.
And again,
Yeah.
I know the basics of medicine and psychology.
Yeah.
Males will take more risks.
Right.
It's the
Higher
testosterone, the brain, it's
testosterone.
everything else.
Less risk management. Absolutely.
I might also say that males, I think, physically, as far as agility, physically, on average, might be more skilled drivers as far as physically.
Yeah.
Can you go 200 miles per hour? Can the average male go 100 miles per hour more comfortably than the average female can? Probably, as far as skill.
Maybe,
But
yeah.
but again, but here's the issue. That is true, but at the same time, these insurance companies and others on the left do say that it's wrong to say anything about one gender. Say one gender does one thing, or I guess make a statement about a gender, a broad statement. They say, oh, you can't say all females do one thing or all males do one thing. Yet with insurance companies, they do it, but I don't see that same feminist aggression against insurance companies because it benefits them hundreds of dollars a month, right?
Right.
Did your insurance rates already go down, by the way?
Yeah, my insurance rates dropped by $60 when I changed my gender.
Jeez. You know what percentage of a drop that was? 'Cause it's pretty cheap
It was like
in New
30%.
Hampshire anyway. Jeez, that's incredible.
It's like a
Yeah.
30% drop.
So
what it's tough because when you look at humanity and you zoom out and you get enough data points, there are differences between different kinds of groups of people. There are differences between men and women. There are differences between different races.
Yeah.
Now the issue comes in when you take an individual, you look at the group that they belong to, and you say, because this individual belongs to this group, they must have X characteristics. Because this person is male, they must be a bad driver. That's not the right thing to do, but it's important.
But sometimes
to
it's pretty true.
Acknowledge. Well, they might have an inclination. So, for example, men have higher insurance rates because we're more likely to get speeding tickets, to get into accidents, things
Yeah.
like that when we're young.
No, it's correct as far as the
No, it is.
appraisal
It
of
is
the actuaries.
100%.
It's
Absolutely.
correct that we cost more to insure. We cost more, damage to a car.
But if you just pick Joe Schmo, you can't say, oh, because Joe Schmo is
as
male,
an
he's a bad
individual,
driver.
you don't know. Yeah, about that individual.
Exactly.
Just a group. Yeah.
But it's tough because I feel like a lot of these people on the left, they look at some of the perks that maybe a specific group gets because of the way that group exists. So, for example, like you look at women have lower insurance rates than males,
And they don't get drafted.
Right, and so
If a draft comes back, the selective service that you have to sign up for, I think when you register to vote or when you turn 18, you're automatically enrolled.
Yeah.
The women, they will never, if a draft comes back to America, because Trump gets us in a war with China or North Korea or Russia, if a draft
Mm-hmm.
comes back, males will have to serve, females won't. So I say that's a benefit.
Yeah. No,
Yeah.
there's definitely a lot of perks to being.
In some countries, females do
But
get drafted.
you know what's funny? So I sent the draft.
Yeah, you
the
told me you
selective
emailed Selective Service.
So I emailed Selective Service
Saying to be
and
taken
I said,
off of the.
I said, the law states only men have to register for the draft. The law specifically states any able-bodied male citizens. I'm no longer a male citizen. I'm now female. I'd like to have my name removed from the draft. And they said, oh no, it's based on your gender at birth. So sorry, no. And I thought, and I read the law. It does not say gender at birth.
And this is
It
the
says
federal
any
government.
male citizens.
And,
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, that's bigoted. Yeah.
Yeah, so
that's discrimination.
that's what happens when you have a big
Yeah.
overwatching
And there's a lot,
binary
as far as the
system.
military, there's a lot about transgenders, about, I think Trump, at least I heard, I don't know how concrete it was, Trump, I guess, is supporting transgenders in the active combat less than previous administration, or
Right.
says transgenders shouldn't be in combat. But I don't know if he actually, went through with that military order.
Yeah.
I'm not sure. But there's a lot to talk about with transgenders and in the military and all that.
Certainly.
But
Certainly.
I want to talk about licenses a little more before we get to the other government institutions like
Sure.
government prisons and courts and schools and all that.
Yeah.
Why not? And someone asked me a few days ago, why not just remove that little M or the F from the license, the binary distinction on the license, male or female? Why do we need it? Why not remove the whole thing and get rid of a whole lot of drama?
Yeah, it's tough to understand why the government would need to know what's between my legs.
Yeah.
For what purpose?
And for identity,
how is it your
you have a
business?
picture. You have to have a current picture.
You have
right?
you have to have a picture. You have to have your height, weight. You have to have your hair color, eye
Yeah,
color.
that does more
How-
than the male or female because
Yeah.
As far as identifying you and making sure you're the person that you say you are in your license, the picture, and I understand why it's there so they can see who you are.
Yeah, but
But the
you
male
know,
or female doesn't do much for
I know
them.
some girly looking dudes.
Yeah, yeah.
And
Oh,
I know
for
some
sure.
manly looking women.
yeah,
You know.
yeah.
So it's so arbitrary.
Yeah, so there are a lot of other issues that I think are going to become more evident in the next few years within the government, and it matters because this is the law. So the private institutions ultimately, we believe, can do anything they want. But as far as prisons, let's talk about prisons for a minute. Currently, all the prisons, all the state prisons, federal prisons, I believe they're all segregated, right? Male and female. Male prisons only, female prisons only, right?
Absolutely.
And just the little bit I know about the psychology of prisoners, a tiny bit, I would think that if you're a male prisoner, the last thing you want to do is stay in prison. I've transported a few prisoners in the ambulance going to a hospital. Very often, and I'm sure a lot of them are BS claims, a prisoner might say, I have chest pain or back pain, and they're both kind of unprovable. Back pain's the great unprovable. You can't prove they don't have back pain.
Yeah.
So they say that, and they go to the hospital. They get to see pretty nurses for a few days. They get to go out in the open air, go on an ambulance, which is more risk for escaping and escaping prison, because now you're being transported, you're being moved. But they get to spend a few days in the hospital hanging out with the nurses. That's better than being in prison, for those few days, right? So they want to get out. Now, but I'm sure a lot of males, especially those who are in there for sexual assault or those who are doing it in prison, I'm sure a lot of them would love to get to a female prison, right? To do what they're going to do to females.
Yeah.
Currently, going forward, and again, this is a serious question. What's to stop 30% of the males in male prisons, the deviants, the attackers, from saying they identify as female, go to a doctor and maybe getting a note from the prison doctor, and the law will, because of the government, they will force the prison, which is run by the government, to transport that person to a female prison to serve the remainder of their term. And then they can be an actual male 100%, just saying, I identify as a female.
Well, even now, instances of rape and sexual assault in prisons, just male prisons, is extremely
I'm sure,
high.
yeah.
It's horrible. It's horrifying. I can't imagine going to prison. But I want to see the ACLU and I want to see the LGBT community,
stand up for women.
Stand up for women, or
and I want to see women stand up for women.
But it's such a tough issue though, because it's like, if it's some big burly 6'3", 250-pound jack dude, and he's like, yeah, I'm a woman. Are we?
But you can't disprove it. Is what I'm saying.
Yeah,
you can't disprove it.
And that's what's tough, is when you say it's a spectrum and it depends on your own perspective. Then it's like, well, what's going to stop instances like that?
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
So that's, I think, a big issue. And I think that the courts, because ultimately these cases will go to court, the courts will be overwhelmed. Look for some more circuits to be created on a federal and state level over the next decade. That's what I predict. They will be overwhelmed by these cases, I think. And there's the prison issue. There's the whole school issue. There are so many of these issues where the government run. Yeah. So I want to get into the bathroom issue a little bit, because New Hampshire state government and Sununu signed the law a few months ago that I believe forced the private businesses, every private business in New Hampshire, to allow, it forces them to let people into the bathroom that they say they identify with. So if I walk into any business in New Hampshire and say I want to use the women's restroom, according to the way I interpret House Bill 1319, I believe they would have to let me into the female bathroom. Every private establishment.
I've got a license that says so.
Yeah, and especially for you, but even for me, because otherwise it's discrimination.
Yeah.
And the problem with this is it violates property rights, because they have rights to that property. That's how I see it.
Yeah, absolutely.
And I want to talk about schools as well. What's your take overall, being gender fluid, especially with the school districts? A lot of school districts throughout the country, I believe, are now forcing the school staff to let anyone into any bathroom, locker room, and shower that corresponds with the gender they identify with at any given moment.
Yeah, showers. I didn't even think of that, but that's just it's.
But how do you do? What's the solution? Do you think?
Go with biology.
Yeah, but that's hard.
If you guys won't say it,
Yeah.
then I will. This is an easy solution. There are two sexes. There are two
But
genders.
I actually have an easier solution. I think the way to solve this issue, as far as what should the government do about school districts, I say get the government out of education.
Oh,
the
yeah.
government shouldn't be taking our money by force and
Well,
using
and
it to
there's
run
your
schools
answer.
to
Yeah.
indoctrinate our kids.
Exactly. See, everything has to be centrally planned when the funding itself comes from taxation. It has to. You have to take these fringe cases, which is little Jimmy wants to be a girl, and you have to nationalize and centralize it. Whereas you could have a school that says this is our policy, and you could have another school that says this is our policy, and you could choose which one to send your kids to.
Yeah.
You know, so yeah, I think the issue always comes back to a violation of the non-aggression principle and a violation of property rights.
Yeah.
And it's very easy to connect the dots, even if they seem, you know, abstract like that.
Yeah. And I want to focus, and I mentioned it earlier. I really want to focus on the official, like, you know, the term Facebook official. It's not official till it's official and kind of certified by a certain entity, right? And I would say Facebook makes more sense because at least, you know, it's kind of, you know, voluntary. We sign up for Facebook. Whereas the government, I never signed the contract to allow government to rule my life.
Exactly.
Society, and it's sad because
But my
it's our own
social
fault.
contract.
Yeah, the society, it only acknowledges that something is a fact, like marriage and kids, only if you have the marriage certificate, the birth certificate. The government's involved in everything.
The death certificate.
And
yeah.
again, when they get involved, now that the government is the institution giving out that marriage license, for example, that allows them to use that for manipulation. And I would love to write an article one day about the tax code, all 73,000 pages of the U.S. federal tax code, being used as a tool to manipulate behavior. And again, you could say marriage is good for society. I know a lot of conservatives would say that, and kids are good for society. Otherwise, humanity, you know, goes extinct. But currently, the U.S. tax code giving you money. If I were to get married right now, I'd save, I think, $7,000 a year in a tax credit. Just pay less taxes. I would save $7,000 if I got married. Isn't that an incentive? You know, giving you $7,000?
Absolutely.
That's a reason to get married. So you're more likely to get married because there's a $7,000 carrot than not, right?
Right.
Same with kids. Right. I believe it was Marco Rubio, Democrat from Florida. I mean, Republican from Florida, and
Same thing.
He wouldn't support the Senate version of the American American Tax Cuts and Jobs Act, the new tax reform that Trump was supporting. Rubio wouldn't support it until I believe the tax credit for each child was increased from $1,000 to $2,000, I believe. So that's double the manipulation. And again, will I have kids? Yes, I plan to get married and have kids. But for the government to have the power to use the federal tax code to give you an incentive to do a certain act, any act, good acts like marriage or having children, or bad acts like anything else, buying a hybrid. You know how much money you'll get right now from the federal government, from state governments for buying a hybrid or an electric car?
How much?
Back, I don't know, New Hampshire. Back, I could have gotten, I think it was $5,000 from the feds and another $2,500 from New York State.
That's crazy.
As a gift, just money, a tax credit, just as a gift, cash money.
That's
for
crazy.
buying an electric car. And I was considering it.
Yeah.
And again, they manipulate behavior.
Yeah.
Now people think marriage is probably good, kids are probably good. Some people think electric cars are good. Personally, I think they're bad, and apparently the lithium-ion batteries are worse for the environment than the regular fuel. But they can manipulate behavior. That's the issue. They can give a marriage license to those who and give them a benefit for getting married, a tax incentive, money, a financial incentive to have kids, and who knows how many other behaviors, 73,000 other pages of other manipulation.
Right.
And it's sickening. Buying hybrids, buying certain things, buying solar panels. Oh, one day someone knocked on my door in New York, and we were renting, so it didn't apply to us. They said if you're the homeowner, we'll give you, Governor Cuomo in New York State is giving you like a $2,500 tax credit for you put solar panels on your roof. They're manipulating behavior, and I'm subsidizing it because I didn't have solar panels, so I'm paying more so that others who don't have solar panels can pay less taxes.
Great time to own a solar company in New York. So I don't mean to cut you off, Elliot, but we do have a special guest on the Liberty Block today. So were we going to do the screen for We'll Be Right Back? Or
So we're going to take a 1 minute break. We're going to have Aaron Day, Libertarian candidate for governor in studio. We'll be back in 1 minute on Liberty Block Live. Don't go anywhere. Take a break, get some snacks, keep sharing this video out. We'll be back in 1 minute with Aaron Day.
1 minute.
Hi, this is Elliot Axelman from the Liberty Block. If you like our video, hit like, share, and subscribe. Check us out on libertyblock.com.
Always principled, always libertarian.